I mean, it's a good place to start, like how we how we started. I think that's a good place to begin, right? Like, how did the story of Hyperlane Eco come together? I don't know, Ryan, if you had a different idea.
No, I mean that's a really good starting point. I can kick it off from like the eco product vision perspective, and then we can back it into, you know, where we met along the way.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a partnership from our perspective that's been, progressing for the better part of, I don't know, several months now, to a point of inevitability this fall, basically. And so I think if you pay attention to Eco Online, you know that we want to basically do one thing, and that's like standardize the one-click stable send anywhere on chain. We're not really building for everyone who's here. We want you here as well, but we're building for all the new people coming in, and we think that's the user experience that ultimately is going to need to be standard for them to use on-chain apps. And there's a few components in that. Basically, you just got to get stablecoins flowing cross-chain, which means you need liquidity routes for them. That's one like key component in the system. And we started to design what those liquidity routes might look like earlier this summer using an intent paradigm. We did a lot of deep R&D and kind of like the existing state of the intent market. We talked to some of those teams, and we came out of those conversations thinking we could probably try to design something where settlement was a little more flexible and a little more modular in terms of how you pass a message that an intent was fulfilled correctly, how you secure that data, and how do you give app developers like what I want to say, like parameters that they can customize. If you can make settlement modular as well as some of the other parameters in a liquidity route, then the developer can probably consume that, integrate it, and optimize it for their own user journey and for their own requirements that they want that liquidity for. And so when we started thinking about it, we're like, one of the the messaging route or the sort of like validation mechanism that a transaction happened correctly is one of the things that you can make modular and you can make customizable. And so then we thought about, okay, well, that's just like a different type of a proof or a different type of a message to pass. And who do we want to work with in passing that message and in making sure that that's secure? And by that point in time, we had met the Hyperlane team, and we thought, okay, one awesome implementation of their sort of generalized tech would be to build a prover with it, basically. And we called that the Hyper Prover. And now, at least within Eco's product suite, we call that the Hyperlane Route, capital R Route. And one area that we're incredibly aligned, and one reason why we worked with Hyperlane first in bringing this to market is we want it to be permissionless for new app developers and for new chains. And that's like a core value prop to their own technology. And so if we tightly couple those, then we should be able to build a liquidity route that any new developer or new chain can like integrate day one, block one, to bootstrap. And we think that that's really powerful and fills a gap in the marketplace. And so that's how we met. That's why we met. We're rooting for each other anyway, but now we have reason to work together, and it's sick. All right, I'll pass it off. Where do you want to go from there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like I think one thing that people might enjoy is kind of like how we literally met, or like at least I mean, I guess I can only tell the story of how I met Christian, because I think it's honestly even before that, like I think at some point I remember like Christian, was it true? Like I think you were like in our Discord. I think you had some questions, and I remember like who's this guy? Is that
Yeah, I think I was literally in the Discord. I think like one day I had some questions. I was reviewing all the different messaging protocols that we might want to use, and I think I just like DM'd you from Discord. It's like, hey, I have some questions. Added you, and then we just got in a DM and started chatting about Hyperlane and some of the benefits that Hyperlane provides. It like compared to some of the other messaging protocols, and that was a while ago. I think that was like maybe a year ago.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It did, like, not gonna lie, it felt like ages. And I remember, I think when you probably did that first cursory research, I was just like, oh, like Eco, like seen them like I've heard of Andy before, just like followed his tracks a little bit, and I was like, oh damn, like let me talk to this guy. Like no idea who he is. Like I don't even think he has a profile picture, but like he must. I didn't even know that he worked at Eco, to be honest. I just like he said he worked for Eco, so it must be true. But yeah, I remember like talking, I think with you, Christian, and I remember there was a bit of like I hadn't heard from you in a while, and I was like, oh, I wonder what's up there. It's like I was like, let me catch up. And then yeah, it seemed like it coincided well with I think the push that you mentioned earlier summer when you guys kind of are thinking more about the like kind of like intent product experience. And yeah, I think we like are very aligned on that note of kind of like, hey, right, like there's a lot of like for like I think that's honestly how the industry generally works, right? Like it's like somebody has to basically do everything first to kind of like prove out the concept, but then it turns out like like to get this product kind of like calibrated, to get it to more places, it just turns out like building in that monolithic way makes it kind of harder to like like grow the product, grow the market for the product. And yeah, like I think modular systems generally have an advantage in that like people can focus on different parts of that stack. And so like super, I think, insightful of you guys from Eco to kind of recognize that like, hey, yes, like this kind of intent product experience, super cool, right? Like we could talk about kind of the fundamentals of like why that is a fundamental improvement over maybe traditional bridging of assets. But yeah, like we don't have to do everything ourselves, right? Like, I mean, you guys actually did that, right? Like you guys did the native route, and there's obviously like pros and cons to everything. But like very happy to kind of see how your view of like, hey, let's make this modular fit very well with kind of like how we also think about it, Hyperlane, right? Like as kind of like, like the ISMs being the kind of like modular proof point. And so this kind of felt like a very natural kind of collaboration to kind of allow both projects to be able to benefit from this collaboration.
Yeah, I strongly agree. I think actually, like, we talked, and then 4 months later, you checked in with me, and like the moment you sent me that Discord message, I actually remember where I was. I was sitting in my chair at my old house, and I was in the rabbit hole thinking, like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? What messaging system are we gonna use? All these other messaging systems are so closed. They offer like not very much customizability, and I was like doing the Excel diagram where I was looking at the chain coverage for all the different like messaging protocols, and then it was like ping. And Nam, you were like, "What's up? How's it going? Should we check in?" And it's super fortuitous because I think like Hyperlane specifically offers Eco so much extensibility that other protocols don't. Like you guys have extremely high chain coverage, and the method, like the process of us actually deploying to a new chain is totally permissionless. So we can basically go to any chain that we want to and say, "Hey, day one, you can integrate Eco routes in your blockchain, and you can source liquidity from other blockchains into your native token or into your the native liquidity on your chain," which is super powerful. And then like Hyperlane offers all this flexibility around like running your own solver, setting up your ISMs super modularly any way you want to, and it allowed us to kind of think like from the standpoint of almost like progressive development or progressive security, where we'd start with like Hyperlane-based implementation and then customize from there. So it was super fortuitous, and I'm so glad we ended up working together.
Just imagine Christian in an airport bar right now shouting into his earphones about message bridging and gas optimization and modularity.
Actually, a frequent occurrence. I just don't. I have like no social filter anymore, so I'll be anywhere, at any place, yelling about crypto.
It is true. We were in a session last week where he was shouting about gas optimization and just walking through the grocery store. It's this lunatic from Eco. But
the people at Whole Foods need to know about that.
So true.
Yeah, just picking up from what Christian said, I think it's like just taking a step back. Like for those of you who are joining and don't really know like what the collaboration with Eco and Hyperlane is, like the thing that we built was an intent transfer system that uses Hyperlane as the message bridge to validate intents. And just taking a step back, just from the perspective of how we even got there in the first place, I want to caveat something that Ryne repeats, like we're not in the bridge building business, but there was a need for us to do this. And I want to talk about why that was. We built this payment-focused application called Bend. And in Bend, we had some features that we wanted to give to users which required cross roll-up interaction. And the problem we had was our product was designed to be give an abstracted experience for crypto. So our target customers were people who didn't even understand the concept of chains or rollups, for that matter, or just gas. Like trying to explain people who are at a bar trying to pay an invoice to a merchant that, hey, you need to do this cross-chain transfer because your on-ramp is on Optimism and your off-ramp, the merchant is expecting is in Base. And how do you abstract that away? That's why we needed to integrate a bridge. And as we got into the bridging game and we realized like the landscape, the way that it was going out, we saw the main we saw a need for a permissionless system. And that's like the most important point in this collaboration, is that a lot of projects, the way that they build by virtue of their design, they have to have some kind of gating to activate on new networks, either through governance or through like centralized actors deploying core infrastructure onto those chains. It basically makes it so if you want to do like amazing activations with day one chains, as they're like ramping up, you usually find that they don't have the opportunity or have the scale to actually go to those bridging providers and have them activate on their chain. So you end up with these situations where you want to work on a feature, but that feature requires you going to a chain, maybe having a different kind of fee logic than what the bridge enforces, and you get into the situation where the magic of abstraction starts to break apart, right? At the point where you actually have to contend with the native gas as the message fee, or you have to contend with the fee that the bridge is putting on you have to force the user to think about these things. And that was a non-starter for us, because as Ryne said, like our core premise has been one-click stable send experiences. So that's why when we started to figure out like how do we actually do this, we focused in on intents, because they were the flexible kind of transaction paradigm which allowed us to keep this magic of abstraction going. And as we started to build cross-chain intents, we found out that out of all the message bridges that we could use, Hyperlane was the only one that kind of shared our same thesis of being permissionless. And the proof is in the pudding. Like, we have activated Hyperlane on random chains, rollups that we deploy just for testing, without asking even the Hyperlane team. And just that permissionless aspect married so well with our thesis as well. And that's why we chose Hyperlane and went all in, and it's been amazing ever since.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, sure. That's couldn't have said it better. Like I think, when we started on this kind of permissionless, I guess trend, for lack of a better word, like I guess close to 2 years ago at this point, like it wasn't that consensus. Like I think like Optimism and Arbitrum were still like kind of like trying to get the footing, and everybody was like, yeah, like rollups are cool, but there will be like 10 general purpose rollups, and like that's all we'll ever need. It's like I think the infamous like, oh, you only need like 5K of memory, and that's like all you ever need. Like, why would you ever need more than that? And so I'm really like, yeah, super, super excited that like teams like Eco, right? Like I think also coming to exactly the same conclusion that like, hey, like, right, like the fundamental innovation of our industry is block space, permissionless application infrastructure that developers can use to, right, like, yeah, facilitate like merchant payments, or like hopefully even more sophisticated applications in the long run. But like that just does not work if basically every time you create block space, you have to raise millions of dollars just to be able to kind of like facilitate BD with these kind of like effectively gatekeeping infrastructure providers such as bridges. And so yeah, super happy to I think have you guys kind of like on this alliance of permissionless infrastructure. And yeah, where right, like Hyperlane just reached 100 chains, and yeah, a fair number of them are fully permissionless, right? Like Abacus Works as a developer company is not involved in them at all, and we just expect that number to continue to grow, and like can't wait to have applications like the eco routes basically be available to those applications, both current and future ones.
Yeah, this is something I've actually wanted to ask you about before. I've never really had a chance. Just totally independent of Eco. Go back 2 years ago. What gave you the direction or the conviction to bet on like not an oligopoly roll-up sort of ecosystem, right? Because it's basically a strategic dependency to go full permissionless, right? You have to believe fundamentally there's going to be hundreds or thousands of these things, right?
Yes.
And so what was that kind of iteration process or that decision process like?
Yeah, great question. I think I can't claim credit, like at least not full credit for it. Like I think there were some kind of like influential figures in kind of the Hyperlane lore, which helped us get there. Kind of like way back, I think Zaki Minion from the Cosmos, I think, was pretty involved in the kind of genesis of what ultimately became Hyperlane. And right, like obviously the Cosmos is like very kind of like appchain centric, and I think kind of like has always been built around this idea of like, yeah, like applications will want to kind of own their own block space and customize it. And obviously it's very interesting, like, right, like from when that thesis was first formed, which was like 2016, 2017-ish, to now kind of like how it got shaped, right? Like I think honestly for a while, even like with the rollup-centric roadmap, I don't know that many people really thought of it as like app chains. I think they probably thought of it mostly as like general L2, just scaling further. Like, and so obviously like with, I think the benefit of hindsight, we can now kind of see that like obviously, right, like unit chain and like being able to actually customize block space to accomplish certain behaviors and variants in like the way we mutate block space is like was definitely kind of pioneered, I would say, by Cosmos, right? And then I think my co-founder's brother, I think about 2 years ago, he was, I think that was like the early days of kind of like figuring out, oh, like we want to launch a game and like we want to use blockchain, but you know, blockchains are slow. And so we have to basically create our own block. Like we have to create our own blockchain and like we can run an L1, but that's like, you know, super expensive. Oh, but there's this OP stack thing, which seems like maybe the fastest way for us to actually get block space. And so kind of just seeing this kind of progression of like, right, like people you don't expect like to basically think about like, hey, like I need block space, but I don't need the block. Like the current block space that is being provided by me is not sufficient. And just seeing the lengths that people go through to get that block space, I think was kind of like a key driving force that allowed us to see like, yeah, like this is right, like really no different from really like Web 2 as well, right? Like I think people invent programming languages, right? Like as recent as like Rust, just to solve a problem that they have, even though some people say like, oh, like why would you need another programming language, right? Like this, like there's like a weird engineering pipe dream. But yeah, like I think people are creative. People will be able to push the envelope with things like, yeah, like execution, DA, like consensus. And I think that like, you know, I think anybody is super naive to believe that like, oh, whatever they built will last forever. Like I think the creativity of the human mind is like, yeah, super interesting. And that just means that like, yeah, more block space will create it. And yeah, if we want to work on something like interoperability between that block space, we just have to be humble enough to know that like we will not have the answers. And yeah, like I think a permissionless open source strategy kind of like fits very well. I think with that, I think humility, and that's kind of how we ultimately got down on that path.
Nice. What was the state of the tech at that time? How did you need to redesign, recast the build roadmap once you committed to it?
Yeah, so I think you know, I was talking with the engineering team about this the other day, where like I feel like we got like fairly lucky because a lot of the things that we had already built were like decently modular enough that like it wasn't that hard to kind of like change things up. I would say that like honestly hardest part about building a fully open source and permissionless system is that there's some shortcuts that you just can't take, right? Like I think you just have to like actually like you can't rely on like internal wikis or something, right? Like everything you do has to also be accessible to other people because like sure, you could obviously open source your code, everything, but like if people are not able to actually operate it, then it's effectively not that useful. And then I think the second thing that I realized is that especially since Hyperlane acts a lot in the like long tail of things, infrastructure can be rather challenging, right? Like RPC nodes and like block explorers and like verification tooling. I think that's definitely like, you know, it's the greatest on Ethereum and like getting like less great. I think the kind of more on the edge you get to. But this is, you know, I think again, very similar to Web 2 where like, yeah, like it used to be the easiest, right? To just like be on like Windows and like it took a bit of time for like Linux to basically become more accessible. And so, yeah, I'm sure like, yeah, would love to actually hear about kind of, right, like your paths kind of like along that spectrum as well of like, hey, you probably first started, right, like with a particular way, right, like internal testing. And now that we're kind of talking to some few like other projects and chains that might want, right, like eco routes, like I think there's definitely like a lot of lessons to be learned about like how to get that, how to actually deliver experience, whether that's right, like through you guys or like people permissionlessly operating that experience.
Yeah. Shahrukh, I might call you up on that one with kind of some of our latest learnings, a couple of the background conversations we've had since DevCon as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly the same things that you're calling out. Like to give an analogy and not put anybody on the spot, but like X token, which is the native gas token on the chain, when you're deploying your contracts, like you have to contend with, oh, now you need Nam token for gas, and like, where do I get Nam token? So that's like the first thing that I have to figure out just to deploy anything on that chain. And then the RPCs, and then sequencers have their own, because of their customization, sequencers have their own like different ways that they differ, and there's not good documentation around that. But I think for teams like ours, Nam, I don't know if you share this, I think it's good that teams like ours then enter those new landscapes, because we have the engineering prowess and the funding actually to deal with those things and make that path easier for us. So for others that follow. So every time I go into the new chain and I'm like, oh my God, this is just a complete cluster. I always keep that in mind, that I'm doing this to make the path easier for those who follow, who might not have the same awesome team that I do.
Lost Shahrukh, I think.
Point
But yeah,
stands.
I think
Oh,
points for sure. Oh, there you go. You're back. You're
Point
back.
stands.
where did I leave off? Sorry.
Same
I
awesome
said
team
like
you do.
you,
It was
you said
actually,
you
it
had
was
an awesome
very,
team,
very good.
which I agree with.
Yeah, I mean, we go there, but it's the minutia around RPCs. Like, we do smart 437. So trying to deploy bundlers, sometimes we basically have to deploy our own entry point and bundler on that chain, because they don't have account abstraction even there. We have to deal with the gas. We have to deal with the minutia of the sequencer. But I always stay motivated, because the way that we think about it is, we have the size, resources, and talent to actually make it easier for those who follow. So it's always hard, but it's good work, right? So
Yeah,
no complaints.
Yeah, that's kind of similar. I was talking to another potential partner just this morning about this, where, in a lot of ways, like, this is something that everybody has to go through, right? Like, any ecosystem has to basically build kind of like these like lessons about like, yeah, infrastructure and developer experience and product experiences that you kind of like need to have there. And the problem is that, like, right, like, if you launch a chain, like, right, like, you have to always figure this all out by yourself, but like, once you figure it out, you have very little incentive to actually like, right, like, share that with other folks, because then like maybe you feel like other folks are competitive with you or something. And so there's this kind of like a little bit of like this like game theoretic like system where like, oh, like, how do we get to a point where we actually all share those lessons, so that like we all individually don't have to learn them by ourselves, but we can kind of build on top of abstractions of each other. And so I'm hoping that, yeah, like, right, like, folks like Ika and like here at Abacus Works working on Hyperlane, that we can kind of help basically build these kind of shared abstractions, right? Like, build like, right, like things like, for example, RPC nodes, right? Like, oh yeah, you should be able to easily run kind of like nodes, and then basically have a fallback, a series of RPCs, so that like when one like fails, like, you can have the other. And this is something that, like, again, every advanced, right, like, I can kind of like project will eventually build themselves. But like, why are we all copying kind of like the same thing, right? Not even copying, but like, why do conceptually do all the same thing, but not actually get to reuse this other code? Like, I think another thing that we ran into this week was that, like, oh, on some chain, right, like, typically, like, when you submit a transaction and it has like right, like, a low gas price and like then what the sequencer would include, like, it just sits in the mempool. But like, some of these chains might not actually have that semantic, and so like, just being able to abstract that away, so that allowing more people to basically join in, right, like, as operators, as solvers, kind of like as like UI operators, to basically customize it for their experience, I think is like a super, super like important thing that we as an industry need to do, unless we want to be, again, in this, like, I think, right, like, what you called like an oligopoly basically of chains. And so I think that's just not going to stand. And like, yeah, super, super excited, I think, for all of us to kind of like build those shared abstractions.
Hopefully,
I agree with this perspective so much. Just I'll pass it off to you in a second, Shark. But you mentioned like the game theoretic nature of things right now, and it's just like, one thing that's been interesting for me this year, and I've talked to Shark, Christian, and other members of our team kind of endlessly about this, is like, there's more legit infra that's rolled this year than ever in crypto before, and it can be, if you have something that's like pretty generally applicable, and we both do. Like, on our end, it's like, who needs stablecoin liquidity? A lot of people need stablecoin liquidity. On your end, it's sort of like, who needs to pass messages for certain things? A lot of people need to do that. And so, there's a lot of different directions you could run. And then sometimes in evaluating pathway to market, for us anyways, has been kind of like reading into the competitive dynamic in the industry right now is actually pretty muddy, right? Like, it's like pretty muddy water. But what I've learned, not really learned, I trusted this anyway, but it's just still reality, is the people we want to work with are still very positive sum in the way they operate. And just sort of like trusting it's just so effing early. It's just like we still have hard problems to solve that are extremely positive sum that'll allow other builders to come and land and expand. And that's sort of won out this year for us. I hope it continues to win out sort of as a vibe and as an ethos going through 2025. But it has a lot to do with our own partnership and with the other people we've ended up working with, because I think that just like you have to keep that perspective. If you're trying to, I think, PvP too soon, then there's like still you're still like leaving a lot on the table with problems that need to be solved for the average developer and the average end user to actually come in and to like actually get anything close to our addressable market, which at most we're like 1% of the way there, right, in the life cycle of crypto. And so I think that's just like a really important point of perspective that you made that I agree with and feeds directly into RMO.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully my internet doesn't rug, but I second everything that you're saying, Ryan and Nam. Like, I think it's important to build that key infrastructure. It's needed, but also build it in a way that those who follow can leverage it. And changing the status quo, I think with traditional Web 2 and with Web 3, one of the things that we advocate for that makes me really excited to be in Web 3 is the openness and the permissionlessness of the infrastructure that is built out, right? Like, so one of the things that I do want to call out is you don't have to build something proprietary to be successful in crypto. I hope by the example that Hyperlane is showing and us as well, like following along the ethos of Hyperlane, open sourcing everything, making everything free to deploy, no enshrined operators, just keeping that ethos alive and being successful, hopefully makes other people confident to build the infrastructure out that way, so they don't have to put these gates in just so to keep the edge, and they can actually make an open system and still be successful. So with our examples, I hope that we can like educate the space that you can be successful building it out in the open. It's something that Ryan always calls out internally. He's like, we always need to be building in the open for everybody to kind of like leverage it. And I think Hyperlane kind of shares the same mentality.
And
sure.
I want to add.
Yes.
Oh, I just
Go for
wanted to
question.
add one other thing too, which is it is already such a pain in the ass to do anything on chain. So like I'm like kind of technical, I don't code all day, but like the other day I was like, I'm gonna go on Sepolia, I'm gonna just like deploy some super chain contracts, right? So like first thing, oh my gosh, I have no Sepolia ETH. Where am I gonna go? Alchemy? No, you're not allowed to have any because this new wallet that you're gonna use as a throwaway doesn't have any mainnet ETH. I'm like, great. So I go to another faucet and I don't have any. Then I'm in the Slack begging for Sepolia. I finally get it on mainnet. I have to figure out like how do I get this Sepolia to Base and Optimism because they have this like new beta bridge UI. Anyways, it was a huge pain. It took me like literally 3 hours just to get all of my dev tooling set up just to deploy these super chain contracts. And I'm like, and I feel like stuff like Hyperlane or things like Eco's routes are like super important developer infrastructure to make this process even seamless, like because it's already hard enough. It's already annoying enough to have to deal with cross-chain anything. Setting up the dev tooling and testing environment is already annoying enough. Yeah.
Totally agreed. And so really like, right, like I think we all actually, yeah, I think we all came, right, like just from Bangkok, from DEF CON, right? And I know it sounds a little bit ironic because obviously both of, I guess, our companies are based in, I guess, New York and Silicon Valley, which are probably the most insider places out there. But it is super cool, right? Like I think to be actually around the world and meeting people, right? And they're building, right, like experiences that just like, if you wanted to do this in Web 2, just the amount of hoops, the amount of like funding that you need to kind of get to that point is crazy. And even I think what Christian just went through, the fact that anybody can do this and you don't need permission is pretty much like the coolest thing about our industry, right? I think that is the thing that's going to save us because, like, yeah, for everything else, like, yeah, just like, right, like, go next door in SF and like, yeah, raise from whoever VC you want and do that. But so many, right, like there's way more people living, I think, in places that don't have access to those kind of like networks. And the beauty of crypto is that you don't need to, like, you can build everything yourself. And obviously, like, infrastructure like eco routes are necessary to make that even easier. So you don't have to be like Christian and kind of like scour for like Sepolia ETH just to kind of get it. And not honestly, probably like maybe the question I would ask you guys is that like, like when eco routes, like when do I get to use this? Like there's like new chains launching every day, and I'm always just like, oh, like now I have to figure out how to get there. Like I would love to use like eco routes to kind of like just like fire and forget.
Incidentally, I'm kind of asking the same question in the background. Why don't we loop our product team in? I'm just joking right now. So we had to go through an audit last week to audit routes. And so we finished that audit. We shipped the kind of like the next commit in response to that audit. And then we have a little bit more info to stand up on the services side. So it can truly be kind of like permissionless routes as a service. And kind of like during the audit phase and with some of the services needing a sprint left in the engineering team, we've had to kind of manually support these new opportunities, which basically adds a couple weeks of lead time for us to evaluate any one of them. And then I think once we get to January, we'll be at a point where anyone can stand one of these things up, and we'll just be optimizing the hell out of the time that it takes to stand them up. Hopefully going from hours to minutes, and we can watch volume roll from there. But anyway, context between the lines, Shahrukh can let you know, as we've been kind of like planning out the sprint for the rest of this month and going into the first one in January.
Yeah, we just submitted, as Ryne said, just submitted the audit. We're getting the fixes in. That'll be wrapped up this week. We didn't want people to like test with unaudited contracts. I think that was the right decision by Ryne.
Absolutely.
And right now we're stuck in this middle state where we have an interface which allows you to use eco routes between different chains that we support and have liquidity on. But eventually what we want to get to, just like the product vision, is that we want to build like an app you can go to, put your source chain, put your destination chain, and click a few buttons, and the contracts deploy with this infrastructure where like a pool address where you can like deposit your funds and let them use for intent fulfillments. So you never have to talk to people for getting permission to deploy a bridge route. You can just do it all yourself. We like to call it routes as a service. We think it'll make it really nice integration with like RaaS platforms already. So you already have if you're ever deployed a rollup, you already have a section, it says bridge. What if that bridge could be more than just the parent chain that you're settling on? What if it could be any chain? With Hyperlane, it can even be non-rollups, just other EVM chains and even non-EVM chains. So the vision is like, you can just do it yourself, and you should be able to do it yourself with like the key infrastructure that we've built out. So yeah, really excited to trial that out in January. And that's our bar, like 5 minutes to deploy a route and from your chain to any chain that you want.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great, I mean, obviously amazing experience, actually not just great, amazing experience, right? Like for these chains, because obviously like, as you know, like I'm talking to a lot of these chains and they're always asking like, oh, when do I get something like this, right? And like right now it just includes like, yeah, like just being in this BD funnel, like even if they get Hyperlane permissionlessly, right? They can do all this themselves. Then they get this question of like, well, sure, I have a, right, like lock and mint bridge from Ethereum to my rollup. But like, what do my users do who are on Base and Arbitrum? And they're just kind of like stuck there. They have to kind of like use some other product to get to Ethereum just to then get from Ethereum to their rollup. And so, yeah, being able to self-serve, right, like eco routes through this like routes as a service sounds like an amazing experience. But even honestly before that, right, like even before routes as a service, like I think just having eco routes available to many more chains, I think is something that like, right, like new chains are launching. Like I think there's a lot, like honestly this calendar, even just this month is going to be very busy with chain launches. And like having access to just like an easy way to get, right, like a stablecoin from where I'm already on, which is probably Base, Optimism, Arbitrum, right, like Binance, to the chain I want. Like I don't want to have to think about this. I want to just go to one product. I want to be able to bridge and get to the new chain, check it out, see what's all about. And like I think both you and I want that to be eco routes. So let's get those eco routes up.
100%. And there might be something, just dropping some alpha, there might be something we drop in the Hyperlane Discord sometimes in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for that if you're there. Just showing like a prototype of what we're building so far. And also, if you are a new chain and you do need routes set up, my DMs are always open. Ryne's DMs are always open. Nam's DMs are always open. He's sending us chains all the time. So if you do need that and you have a short turnaround time, it takes us a couple of hours to deploy on any chain and under a week to set up liquidity if needed. So until we like flesh the system out and we're building it, we're still happy to work with any rollup who does need it. So if you need routes to be successful for your product, we can help you get there. So please DM us, please reach out. But hopefully soon we can build something that you wouldn't even need to talk to us and you can do it yourself.
Even before that, I would say we've talked to a couple chains that were just still trying to think and reason through their user journey to get into the chain. And to the extent that that relates to like a simplified stable send user journey, we want to talk to you about it. And so like, even if you're kind of like really early in the process of trying to figure out how you want to deploy, how you want to launch the thing, how you want to track liquidity getting into it, what the user experience of that should be. Somewhat depends on the destination. What are they bridging in to do? We want to talk to you about it. We've thought a lot about it. We've mapped the ecosystem pretty well, and it's never too soon to start to talk to us about how do we get stables flowing into our thing, whatever your thing is. We're here to support, and of course that'll be more permissionless and faster to support as we get into January. But we're here to talk about it now, and so I would say that we want to be in that conversation, involved in that conversation as early as possible.
Yeah.
Because we're really focused on that user experience. Like, how does the user, as simply as possible, get to your thing? Deposit, play your game, whatever it may be. That's what we want to talk about.
Yes. Actually, I think maybe we should have actually done this in the beginning, but I'm actually kind of, it would be actually, I think, be valuable, I think, for the audience to kind of hear, right? Like, hey, like, what do you assess the current situation to be, right? Like, if you launch a new chain, like, basically, what is your experience, what is the user experience that you can basically get to today with, like, little effort? And, like, once, right, like, eco routes are available, like, what are chains going to get as a user experience for their users, and why does it matter for chains?
Yeah, I think, it always has to be derived from what your use case is, right? And so a general purpose chain might want as many routes for as many assets as possible to get to their chain. And we could be a route for the dominant stable assets. That's great. But some other applications, some other protocols, app chains may want something that's stablecoin denominated, and we can own that, we think. And so if you're that type of application, say you're sort of launching StableSwap AMM, a game that takes stablecoin payments, some other type of payment app on some new rollup, new destination, and you need stablecoin routes into it. Right now, most of your bridging interface options are going to be sort of general purpose, and it's going to require the average user. It's sort of like the UI is going to sort of like read into the user's wallet and require the user to select among all the possible assets they have or all of the possible chains that UI serves. Maybe it gates some of them intelligently, not all of them do. Some of them do, the better ones do, to kind of like only the right destination assets accordingly. But there's going to be basically more information for the user to process than they actually need to complete the action. And if you come from the world of payments, which a StableSend basically is, or especially the world of e-commerce and checkout, you know that the more numbers and the more steps you throw at a user, the worse your conversion is getting in. And so that's why we basically think it's a killer kind of value prop for an average app to be able to just say one-click StableSend into our thing. Logic is managed in the back end, and the user experience can be that seamless and that simple. And we think it's going to increase conversion for people to ultimately, deposit and move liquidity. The other thing that we can offer is, a lot of these intent-based routes or the partners we work with do require some aspect of liquidity management in the back end. And so we can also offer that as a value prop and bring some liquidity with partners to bootstrap and help manage that across your routes to ensure that they're solvent, that they're extremely performant, fast, and cheap for the average end user. A lot of people, might come to us and they say, well, we want intent routes from a number of different directions, but we haven't thought at all yet about like how the assets land, what the liquidity management looks like among the routes, and we can also help think through that quite a bit and ensure that the liquidity is optimal for the route you need. Those are sort of which is ultimately is a user experience point as well. Fewer reverted transactions, liquidity available, fast and cheap where the user wants it. So whenever we're talking about anything infrastructural eco, we're almost always thinking about the simplicity of the user experience that it enables, basically. Christian, Shahrukh, anything to add?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to say, too, like, I think a big benefit of what we're offering is just the entire experience right now of setting up your chain as like a developer. So sourcing liquidity is this total nightmare. Most chains opt for lock-in mint bridges, which means they end up on their chain having like a bunch of different stablecoins. I've got Optimism, USDC, I've got Base USDC, I've got whatever. And you actually want your user to be in like maybe your native token. So then you have to set up all these AMMs with all these different representations of these currencies on your chain, which have a lot of slippage, and it's really confusing to the user. You'd be like, okay, now I have to, first of all, you have to have a messaging protocol. With Hyperlane, you have that. So I have to lock my funds in this bridge. I get a representation of my funds on the other side. Then I have to figure out which AMM is the best one to swap into the native asset that I want to do the thing. Then I need to figure out, do I actually have gas tokens to do that? and then I need to do the thing, right? It's like a ton of steps. It's like 5 steps, and then and then the worst part of it for the chain and for the user is all those funds are just sitting in a lock and mint bridge, right? Which is like not the best and most optimal experience. And they're being double counted from liquidity perspective. Like, sure, you have Optimism USDC on your chain, but actually that USDC is on Optimism and it's just being represented on your chain. It's not native liquidity. It's not your native token. It's not your native stablecoin. And so like, you're kind of like growing your bridged TVL, but not your native TVL. So like the future with eco routes, like what I envision the future is your user can do a single signature to lock up funds from multiple chains at once. And we can compose that stablecoin transfer into either native liquidity that's on your chain, not in a lock and mint bridge, or some sort of action you want your user to do. So maybe it's one signature and you mint a Genesis NFT. Maybe it's one signature and you deposit your stablecoin in a yield-bearing pool. Maybe it's, whatever it is. And you abstract away all of that complexity that a user and developer have to think about and all the risks associated with lock and mint bridges into this very simple, seamless, one signature action that gets your user where you want them to be. So that's what I view as like the ultimate future of eco routes and a huge value proposition that we can provide to these chains.
Yeah, and just adding on, like we're scratching the surface. Like eco. So one thing, even if you're not lucky enough to have Hyperlane set up on your chain, your lock and mint bridge is even worse, right? It's the native bridge. That is essentially the lock and mint bridge that you come out with, and it goes only one way. Parent to roll up, and then going back takes 7 days or the finality of your roll up. So it's not a great situation to be in as a roll up, as someone who's launching a roll up. And so having this infrastructure just makes it easier to do what you built the roll up to do in the first place. You don't have to deal with all of this stuff just to get your product market fit figured out. Focus on the actual product that you're building. You don't have to worry about all of this. The size of now that RAS has gotten to a point that it's a platform play, you have teams that are much smaller deploying these rollups, and when they actually have to deal with the weight of this infrastructure, it usually just destroys the team, right? Like we've had multiple rollups in the past just because of not access to enough liquidity in a convenient way. They've actually not been able to test out their product thesis because they just never got even they couldn't even start. They couldn't even start there. And one other thing that I will say, so I'm very excited about this future. But the other thing, just to piggyback off what Ryne was saying, I'm really excited about what's next, because eco routes just defines a cross-chain intent using Hyperlane. But as Nam said, we could then do so much more. What Christian is sketching out a vision, this single-click experience, is that you should be able to do a single transaction and bridge from mainnet into the rollup and stake into a pool and have that already done. Intents kind of unlock that. With Hyperlane, we can make these things more complex. So I'm very, very excited once these routes are set up, how applications that build on those rollup leverage them to make amazing, seamless one-click experiences, which is why I joined Eco in the first place. So yeah, really excited about that.
Great. Yeah, I think it's funny, like I think we as an industry have talked about intents for quite a while, right? And I think really the main manifestation that we have is like, swap, right? Like, yes, we can like now swap without explicit like routing, but there's obviously like users want to do so much more than just that. And yeah, I think the like true definition of what we're really trying to accomplish is basically what, Christian and Shahrukh, you guys just laid out. But I'm also assuming that that takes time, right? Like I think day one that might not be quite there, and like obviously for that I think you might need deeper integrations. And I think one thing maybe that I can share, but like what we've learned is that we've had somewhat similar views, right? Of like I think when way back when we started, back then we were called Abacus Network. We kind of envisioned basically like developers building these applications, which we call like kind of like native cross-chain, right? Like you actually like have smart contracts on every chain and like users interact with it, and like you actually will abstract the bridging. And like I'm very glad that like I think back then we pivoted away, because it's definitely like where we see the future, but there's definitely like steps towards the future that have to kind of be accomplished. And so even though we all know like in this room right now that like I think general purpose bridge UIs like are not where we're going to stop. Like I think they do probably represent a like useful stepping stone, even for something like eco routes. And so yeah, again, can't wait to get those live. And like, yeah, whenever you guys have them ready, like, let's ship them.
Definitely so. I think we're working with a couple of the general purpose kind of bridging UIs right now. We want our routes available there, and we're pushing them as well to like optimize the front end even further, right? Like if the eco route is the default route or is the most competitive or performant route, like you can minimize sort of a lot of information that you ask the user to process, right? And we really want to make that reality for the routes that we serve ultimately, to just like affiliate eco with the like simplest, ubiquitous user experience for sending a stable anywhere on chain to do your thing. And so, we want to play kind of sort of in the route competition game, of course. And so we want integrations with a lot of kind of like the more general interfaces that'll serve a lot of these general purpose chains, some of the name brands we know that are rolling right now. But we want to work with them on conversion at the front end as well. I think the more chain information and numbers you throw at the average person, the worse your conversion gets. A lot of us kind of like crypto lunatics can probably process that, and maybe we want to see that information, but you can abstract a lot of it a lot more effectively now, and you can do it with some smart front end logic depending on what the route is and what the underlying asset it's passing is. And so that's something we really want to, through the partnerships we have, kind of push to improve ecosystem wide, even if it's not our UI. I think it's really important.
Yep, agreed. Cool. I think we're getting towards the end of our broadcast, but yeah, we kind of would love to hear basically, right? Like people should stay tuned, right? Maybe check the Discord, maybe check check Twitter for like when things go live. And yeah, like I think it will be glorious. I think we'll know there. Like obviously you have to get audit in place, like have infrastructure in place, liquidity in place. But yeah, like Shahrukh, Christian, Ryne, you want to share any last words to kind of like we wrap it up for like have people to be on a watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you guys kind of build on whatever, Shahrukh, Christian, but I'll say we're super easy to find, really easy to find at ECO. Doesn't get any simpler. Eco.com, that's where we live. Online, there will be a new site with more information rolling in the weeks to come. Docs are being updated weekly at this point in time. Basically, every week there will be a material update from Eco indefinitely, but especially over the next month or so as routes get ready, as we support new chains kind of with a direct integration and with direct partnership, but also as we take them to the point where they're truly permissionless to integrate. And then we'll be incredibly excited to see what comes through the door, obviously, and to see who we can support on a more permissionless basis. It's kind of a dream to get to a point where we learn that our routes were deployed after the fact, right? And that's where we'll be.
It is a glorious feeling.
Yeah, I know. It's just great. It's just great. So we're getting there quickly. But I would say watch us on Twitter. Look for the docs updates, but you kind of have to, we'll announce those when they're material. Otherwise, like keep your eye on Twitter at Eco, and every one of these sort of kind of material updates to routes readiness or kind of early partnerships that go live, you'll see there first. Christian, Shahrukh, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just say final words. If you want more information, go check out our docs. I wrote all this docs, so just if you have questions, DM me at Blessed Gondola. And if you need anything else, yeah, let me know. I'm super excited. Been working with Hyperlane has been awesome. So if anyone wants my feedback about working with Hyperlane, I will glow about how awesome it is to work with them.
Also, feedback on the docs. Everything's a product, including docs. So Christian's a great writer, great technical writer, but we want a feedback loop there. What sort of detail is missing? What can we make easier? Let us know, please.
Yeah, I'm super excited with the partnership so far. I'm really excited to actually get the product to a point where we don't have to do chain activations. They just happen and we find out about them. Exactly what Ryne is saying. Like that's my ultimate dream. So excited to execute that, where we have an MVP ready, but shipping it, productionizing it, and actually getting it live to put it in users' hands next January. I'm super looking forward to that. So yeah, I'm in shipping mode, getting this thing live, and really happy to see how people use it.